Okay, so it's 3:30 here in the UK, so let's get started. My name's Martin Gill and welcome to the 31st Security Thought Leadership webinar. We've been with you every Tuesday and Thursday throughout the crisis. And the object of thought leadership is to critique the type of security we have today in order that we may have a better type of security tomorrow. And on these webinars, I've been joined by panels from around the world to discuss issues at the forefront of debate. And one that's cropped up from previous webinars has been this one: developing skill sets in the security sector. Do security professionals know how competent they need to be? And just as important, do stakeholders of the security sector know how incompetent security professionals are? I'm very grateful to Skills for Security, who sponsored today's session, and clearly an organisation right at the forefront of this, and indeed our supporters for their engagement with this thought leadership webinar. In a second, I'm going to introduce our four panellists, or rather I'm going to get them to introduce themselves. Once they've all done that, I'm then going to invite each one of them to make an opening statement. When that's done, we'll come to you for questions. So please can I ask you, the audience, to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. The question and answer button at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. And as soon as the panel have finished their opening statements, I will come to you and address your questions. Do get them in as soon as you can, please. Okay, so let's get on then and let's meet our panel. And first and foremost, in rainy Devon, the southwest of England, normally known for its sun, but not today. Let's go meet Simon. Simon, can you introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Martin. My name's Simon Banks. I'm Group Managing Director of CSL Group and a founder of Apprenticeships for Fire and Security.
Thank you very much indeed. From the southwest of England, all the way over to Australia, and Jason Brown. Jason.
Oh, Jason Brown. I'm the National Security Director for Talos in this part of the world, but I also am the Chair of the National Committee for Risk Management, and I head up the Australian Committee for Security and Resilience, plus a dozen other things.
You do indeed, Jason. Okay, from Australia over to France. Olivia, can we ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Olivia Sid. I am a partner of PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I manage a business unit about global security.
Olivia, thank you very much indeed. And finally, David Scott. David, over to you.
Hi there, David Scott, Managing Director at Skills for Security and also Competition Organising Partner at World Skills UK.
Thank you very much indeed, David. Okay, so let's go to our opening statement and start off with Simon Banks. Simon, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Martin. Well, it's interesting to see that this is a world webinar and that we're focusing on skills and competency from around the world. I mean, in the UK, and I speak for the UK, not everywhere else, but in the UK, we have a major problem with a lack of skills and a lack of competency in some areas. And I think the irony is that a lot of new skills that come into our market via apprenticeships and other practical means actually increase the competency and acuteness or awareness, the acute awareness to skills through proper learning. We have something called a government initiative in the UK called Trailblazer, and through Trailblazer, we've seen a very relevant curriculum developed that's extremely sort of targeted and very specific to young people's needs and what they need to know in 2020 rather than what they needed to know 20 years ago. So it's very often curriculums are worryingly or woefully out of date. So I think those are the things, but I speak for sort of UK and Europe. We have a 26 billion euro industry. We have an engineering skills shortage of 30,000 engineers. We need them. We're putting on around about 1,000, but attrition suggests, or churn suggests that we're not filling the tank back up for skills. So we're in a pretty dire situation actually as far as skills are concerned, and I think that affects competency as well. So that's really my introduction, and what are we doing about it? We can talk about later on in the webinar, but yeah, I think that sets the scene.
So thank you very much indeed, appreciate that. Let's now go to Jason Brown. Jason, your opening statement, please.
Thanks, Martin. Look, that was an interesting thing to follow on from, because we have many of the same issues. I think probably compared to the UK, our certification model linked to security licensing and the various forms of licensing is probably a bit stronger, and the relationship between our vocational education session and business is very, very strong. And I think having a strong security association has helped with that. But nevertheless, there is variability across state boundaries. And the question for me is, where do we start with it all? Starting round at certificates 1, which I don't think the UK has, through to some of the equivalencies. But I have a particular interest in developmental pathways and how developmental pathways to build confidence and capability more broadly is really important.
That's it, Jason?
Yep. Good.
Okay, thank you very much. Just making sure you finish. I didn't want to interrupt your opening statement. Jason, thank you. Let's go to Olivier Hassad in France. Just for our audience around the world, Olivier hasn't got a camera, so you'll just hear his voice. Olivier.
Yes, thank you. I want to develop to 2 levels. Firstly, from a consulting perspective, I have seen the emergence of several trends in sought after skill sets. The need for crisis management and business resiliency skills have become apparent since COVID-19 health crisis, and the lack of qualified technicians to respond to increasing cyber risk and threats. The corporate intelligence and the increasing need for research and investigative support, and a point for me important, it's marketing and communication skills in order to change perception about our activity internally and externally. The second level is in terms of national and industry support. France has begun developing a structure for classifying its private sector security professions, including defining needed skill sets and providing a series of new certification. Example of sector most targeted by this initiative are, for example, protection of high value or classified location, transportation security, middle management. We have an important subject with weapons management, and I think a very important point, the increased automation, for example, drone surveillance. This process was instigated on a national level in France due to the realization that there was a lack of qualified applicants for private security position from middle management who are able to maneuver practical aspects as well as communication and marketing, all the way through the skilled worker with technical and engineering backgrounds, whom will be able to perform at the intersection of new technologies and human security.
Olivia, thank you very much indeed. So can I just remind everybody in the audience, please, could you ask your questions on the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen? So not the chat button, because we can't see it. Can you please use the question and answer button? And if you put your questions on there, we'll endeavour to get to them. Okay, let's go to our final opening statement. David Scott. David, your opening statement, please.
Thanks, Martin. So as we go into and come out of recession, we've got opportunity. It's been proven that in the past that skills is directly linked to economic growth. And it's very, very clear from the Chancellor's discussions yesterday or announcement that one of the mechanisms he's going to use to support the economy is through the investment in skills. In recent decades, 20% of the UK's growth has actually been attributed to skills and workplace development. So there's obviously real value in actually investing in skills for the workplace right now. There's loads and loads of amazing work being done out there. For example, the BSIA and Skills for Security are investing really heavily in the development of apprenticeships across Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, and we're working really closely with the Trailblazer group that Simon Banks referred to earlier. But also the SIA held their first ever skills conference earlier this year, which I honestly believe is the beginning of something much, much bigger and more important, which you referred to earlier, Martin, as the sort of national agenda or skills strategy development. But the approach to developing skills in this industry is fragmented. And when there's fragmentation around skills strategy and development, there's normally what's called a skills mismatch, where training offered doesn't actually meet the requirements of what industry needs out there. And that is what we've seen for many years in the security industry. So a national approach to skills development brings coherence and is absolutely vital to make sure that employers and the industry get the skill set that's required for their business, for their customers, and it's vitally important that training providers, professional bodies and employers work together to achieve that. With that being said though, there is often a national approach to the development of apprenticeships that Simon mentioned earlier. Employers, training providers and professional bodies seem to work really, really well when it comes to apprenticeships. And these are often highly sought after by industry. But how do we actually know that those apprenticeships that we're developing are fit for purpose, not just for now, but for the future? And that's exactly why a national skills strategy is absolutely vital, because it brings all of the pieces of the puzzle together to make sure that a national policy, as I would like to call it, is developed and is actually implemented and effective throughout the whole of the industry.
Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate it. Well, let's remind the audience, question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. And our first question is from someone called Success Etim. I hope I've pronounced that right, or E-T-I-M, Etim. A wonderful name, I have to say. And a very, very good question. And perhaps I'll come to Simon to start on this. Where do you start? Where does a security professional start, Simon, on their journey towards gaining competence? And where do you find out, how do you recognize what you don't know, so to speak? And the reason, I think it's a good question in the world of security, but it might be seen as quite damning in any other world to have to ask that question. Simon?
Well, I think competency and skills are quite separate things. Well, they come together obviously in a person, but if we talk about competency, I'm talking about anybody at any level, trained or untrained, you know, whether they can do it. And then you come to the skills shortage and everything else. So but if I was an employer and I need to start getting my workforce, existing workforce, skilled up, if you like, then the best way of doing this is to get is to spend time developing relationships with training providers. They can be private academies, colleges, or academies such as Skills for Security, for example, where David is representing. So I think that's the first thing, because never have I seen anybody successful in their business where they haven't developed a relationship with a training provider. That's absolutely crucial. And that goes for whether you're taking apprentices on, or if your business, as ours is, the security industry is moving very fast. It's a very valuable industry. As I said, it's a 26 billion euro industry that nobody's heard of. It's a massively high tech. So skills don't, you know, they expire after a period of time. So reskilling is hugely important. And David alluded to a recession. I think we're headed for a depression, but maybe recession we get, whichever. I think it's vital that as people change their jobs to fit the economy's stresses and strains, then I think competency becomes ever more important. So the most important thing for an employer is to get a relationship with a training provider. And that's where you start, and that's where it will become very comfortable for everybody involved.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Well, Jason, let me come to you. I mean, in a sense, you run a security function for many years of a very large employer. Jason, where do you start with this, with people at various levels? Let's not just start at the very bottom, various levels. Jason.
I'm going to start with something a little bit left of field. I think the responsibility for building security competencies across the whole spectrum is a leadership issue. And we deliberately, my colleagues and I, work, as previously suggested by Simon, work with training institutions and others. So I specifically am looking to people who can act as security officers in complex parts of the enterprise. It might be where we do submarine engineering, or it might be a major naval depot where we run the dockyards. And so these are complex environments. So while I rely on the technical and further education sector to provide base skills, I look to the colleges and universities to supply higher level skills in security risk management, risk analysis, and so on. But I think it's really important that there's pathways. So someone who comes in as a front of house security provider will come in with a certificate 2 or 3, having pathways to move forward. And one of the things I like about the Australian system is it's modularised. So you can add modules as you go along in your career and move up to higher certificates or diploma status. And that provides you your certification, but importantly, a lot of it's on the job. So I personally like to identify people and engage at multiple levels, both myself and my key leadership staff, by engaging everyone from the Guard Force at the front gate through to universities. I take university undergraduates and postgraduates for internships, give them security projects, put them into the office, and many of them have gone on to other better jobs in government or private enterprise as a consequence, where I haven't had a position for them.
Okay, Jason, thank you. Let me go to Olivier. I mean, the situation in France, Olivier. I'm talking about this journey towards competence. Jason says that this starts at it's a leadership issue. How well developed are the frameworks in France for guiding security professionals through the various stages and pathways?
I think the question of leadership is very important, and also when I talk communications, as a question of communication is also important. But before you must to learn and to have a risk management approach, and we have in France a lot of certification about the risk management approach, and in particular the causal approach is very interesting.
Okay, Olivier, thank you. Let me move on, and David, I'm going to ask a question here from Matthew Porcelli, who's from the United States and has been very instrumental in supporting young security professionals. And his question, David, is: do you feel that security professionals or young security professionals are getting the right motivation from their direct management to highlight their efforts and appear current and relevant? David, it's a really good point, isn't it? That it's one thing on the outside for the structure, to management, often seen as a weakness. One of you said so.
Yeah, I think it's an important point that in a number of sectors that leadership skills that's already been mentioned is lacking in supporting the teams below and developing. I do see a large amount of investment over the years in the security sector in skills and development. Supporting the youth coming through has been something that's been done quite well in our industry, I would say, for many years. Where I think it's difficult is right at the start, that career pathway, because there isn't a noticeable career pathway from entry into the industry right through to management. It brings me back to my original point that the training is fragmented because it's not always directed in the right situations, the right places, the right technology and the right skills that people need to do their job.
Yeah, I mean, just to come back to you on that though, David, I mean, you know, when you talk about leadership skills are lacking, lack of career pathways, training fragmented, I mean, that seems to me both accurate and damning.
Yeah. No, well, it's a good point, but I do think, as I said at the start, there's a lot of good things going on just now that is trying to right these wrongs. And I do think it's been a number of, it's been talked about for years about the careers pathways, but it's never actually been developed. And I know for a fact that the Trailblazer Group are working to develop that exactly as it sounds. They're developing a career pathway right through from level 2 apprenticeship right through to degree level master's apprenticeship. And the SIA, who ran that skills conference, are organising a skills body or board, which they're starting to collate names and people to get involved in. And I do believe that that is an opportunity to actually create policy strategy and an opportunity to actually control the whole skills development for sector. And whether or not that's the plan for the skills board, I'm not entirely sure. But if that is what they spend their time focusing on, then training providers, trailblazers and degree apprenticeships will fall in line with that policy.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Simon, let me come back to you, and a question from Mike Cummings, also in the United States. He's got a really sort of challenging question, actually, which once again, I think captures sort of some of the issues. So his question is this: given that private security supports many vertical markets, is it a matter of identifying universal skills for all security practitioners and then identifying by vertical market specialist skills needed for success in the specific area? And I guess it's this point about how we present security to the world. Simon, your thoughts on Mike's question?
I don't really entirely understand the question, Martin. So
okay.
could you just give me a quick
here's
interpretation?
the point. It's a very, very broad market, Simon, okay, the world of security. In fact, another question coming up in a minute about this very, very point. And so if we're going to define competencies on anything like a meaningful way, is it possible to do that meaningfully because it's so diverse? Or is it a case of we need to take it off chunk by chunk and recognise the fact that it's very distinct?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tacit knowledge in security. We know that because if somebody leaves a particular company, it's like hen's teeth to find. So it's not the international language, hen's teeth, but it is a colloquialism of the UK. But I think so. I think we have the resources to be specific about training where it's needed. I think there is a general, for example, when we were developing Trailblazer, we have the core competencies within that curriculum. This is for the fire, emergency and security systems apprenticeship level 2 and 3. So we have the core competencies in there, and then we branch off into others. I don't think you can necessarily have generic skills for all aspects, because as you say, we can do anything from thermal imaging to biometrics to cyber to whatever it might be, and we do it very well, and it's very, very complex. It's very cutting edge. So I don't think there are generic skill sets. So yes, we have to get specific about training for each sector, and there are many. I mean, the BSIA, the British Security Industry Association, has 16 security sectors which supply services to those verticals. So I think, yeah, core competencies and then specifics for where they're needed, because that's what we need to be good at what we do.
So thank you. Let me come to Jason in Australia. Jason, do you have over there some sort of national recognised structure that where you can go to one place and know what you've got to do and know what the skill sets are?
Yeah, we do. The requirements nationally under the Australian Quality Training Framework do set competencies. There are some variations from state to state because licensing is at a state level and there's a strong relationship. But basically, all the training is benchmarked and audited. So while there's strong similarities to the system, the link between the type of license and nature of license goes to that level of training. We also have some very strong legislation about who can provide security advice. So we start to reach up into that higher level of education into the risk management space where it's security risk management. And the other thing we have, and certainly British standards is pretty good at this as well, we have a very strong local standardization on security. In fact, for those who have an interest, I'm actually redoing our vetting standard at the moment to pick up more aspects of how you need to do continuous evaluation for insider threat. But what's really interesting about that is we've also built in a set of descriptors of the sorts of things you need, both in terms of characteristics and fitness for purpose for people that are going to do vetting, interviews and investigations. So we're going to add that into the training driven by a standard.
Okay.
And that helps.
Yeah, it sounds where a lot of countries want to progress to, actually. Olivier, in France, do you have some sort of national framework there? I bet you do. Do you, Olivier?
Yeah, I think the question of a global security approach is very important. Cyber security, corporate security, corporate intelligence, resiliency is very important, but we have a different public department about this subject, and you have a not fragmented industry on this subject. We have guarding, we have cyber security, but not we have not a federation about that. But I think it's necessary about the perspective and the threats.
Olivier, do you think, I mean, it's important, but do you think a global perspective on competencies is a doable proposition? Is it realistic? Could it be done?
Yeah, for Pricewaterhouse do that, because we think it's possible. If you are a good manager and you have a good communication, after you can have the good expert, you can have some cyber expert, security expert, and you should manage all this expertise. Sometimes I say nothing, but I can manage my teams, and I have different experts about this different subject, and I think it's important, and the client want to be helped about the convergence between safety, security, and cyber security. So I think it's a real challenge, but I think it's possible if you are a good manager.
Okay, David wants to come in on this. I thought he might actually. David, do you want to add some thoughts on this global perspective?
Yeah, there's a number of other sectors done international standards, especially around engineering, mechanical, CAD. And it's something that I aspire to help achieve in the electronic security systems sector through World Skills. World Skills is obviously an opportunity for competitions to be run across many nations, and it gives opportunity to create set standards to compete against. And I do think in order to raise the profile further of the security officer and professional, World Skills is an opportunity to do that. And being involved at the early stages of that will give us an opportunity to develop the standards further really early in the UK, so that if we can have an opportunity to go international with it, we can work really closely with the other nations that are involved in the World Skills competition and create a recognised standard throughout. So it is a really important point. And that there are many sectors throughout the world that actually operate to that same element of same standard.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Simon, I'm going to come to you, and then I'm going to come to Jason on this question. So you might want to listen, because we've been hearing a lot about training and how crucial it is. And Nadim Iqbal has asked the question, or amongst the issues that are raised, is a question specifically to this. All very well saying about getting training. Clients won't pay for it if you're in a contract company. So it's an unrealistic proposition. It's something that's ideal for the majority, for everybody, but unrealistic for many. The very nature of the beast. Simon.
Well, I think it depends on the sector you're in, but I think it's legislation drives a competency, not just be whether you're good at your job. I think health and safety and public safety, I think, is hugely important, where security, or fire and security, where lives are at stake, and certainly with security, public safety. So I don't think it should be an option of whether you have it or whether it's available or whether you can afford it. In my view, if you can't afford the training, then you shouldn't be offering the service, because you're not offering a competent service if you're not trained properly. So that would be my rather generic answer to that. Sorry, Nadeem, if that doesn't answer your question, and maybe somebody else on the panel can, but that would be my answer.
The thing is, I suppose, Simon, is that I mean, perhaps everybody thinks training is a good idea. It's a bit of a no-brainer. You know, I've not heard the argument that it isn't a good idea. There's perhaps an issue about getting people to appreciate its value by being prepared to pay for it. I mean, it remains a challenge in in many sectors still.
Yeah, I think so. I think, look, it should have value in the services that you offer, but that's not always visible and, you know, instantly noticeable when the consumer's parting with their money. So I do think that legislation has to play a vital role in ensuring that it's mandated rather than a matter of choice. You can't leave standards, as I say, public safety, fire and security to choice. It has to be mandated because it's too serious to be picky over.
Jason, you agree?
I absolutely agree with that. And part of it is structural, because even a big company of 85,000 people, a lot of the considerations about entering contracts aren't driven by the internal user who wants the contract. It's driven by the purchasing department, whose primary purpose is to get the cheapest deal. And so you get this dichotomy between what's needed and what the company is prepared to afford. And so depending on how you set up your purchasing arrangements and the weighting that they give to cost versus quality, etc., and training's included in provision of quality, you can get different results. So it's very important for security managers who are making the choices about service provision in the security area to be absolutely articulate on the levels of qualifications of people they need, the types of experience, the expectation of duties, and they ensure that's written into the tender documents, because otherwise, yeah, they won't get training. If the tendering arrangements don't allow for continuous development of the security people, it will fall behind. And in many cases, that's not the case. The decision about the purchasing of security services below the management level is often driven purely by the dollar and not by the requirement in some companies.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Olivier, let me come to you about training providers. It's sometimes taken as a fact that training providers are out there and are skilled and are doing a great job. Now, I just want to put something by you, Olivier, about the situation in France. Of course, there are great training providers. Of course, there are. But as was said earlier, sometimes the training takes place against old competencies without being clear what modern needs are. Do you think there is a problem with the quality and relevance of training provided in security to modern needs and modern demands? Olivier.
It's a good question, but I have no answer. We have a big problem in France because we have not relevant training on security. And it's a real problem, and we don't have, for example, I explain often, we need criminology in France. We don't have criminology in France. For me, security is equal with criminology. We can debate about this subject, but we don't have real training in France. We should learn with ASIS. We should see what we do in England, etc. But in France, we have not relevant training. It's a real problem.
And what's the main reason for that, though? I mean, headline issues, just on a very sort of high level. Why?
I don't know. I don't know. For me, we don't have university about criminology, and we have no reflection about security. Security is bad in France. It's Big Brother. I think there is a problem about the vision of the politics and the population about security and the security management. So we need to go to the USA or to England, Canada, etc. to learn and to have a good training.
Yes, okay, there's a few questions coming through, David. Gary Shields is asking about professional development courses. We've got another question from about the extent to which universities are work in silos. There's no sort of bringing together. And I guess this is a point, isn't it? That you've spoken today and previously quite positively about other organisations that are dealing in this area and working towards the same objective. That is refreshing and relatively rare, but it's a fragmented industry with fragmented interests. Do you sense that this is going to be able to be overcome, that one can adopt a more united approach?
Absolutely, and it comes back to my original point about the national national skills body or national skills strategy for the sector, where that derives and leads the development that the industry will then see, and hopefully in the coming months and years that will be implemented so that training providers like us, trailblazer groups and universities are all working and led by a policy that leads the training in the sector. And like Simon said, when you're talking about public safety, there does need to be an element of a policy or strategy there to lead everybody else. Without that, that policy dictating what the important skills are throughout the sector, because already over the last 17 weeks, we've seen the security industry change dramatically in terms of the technology that's being used, the way people are operating themselves. The skills have now changed in a short period of time. And as I've said at the start as well, now is an opportunity to support the economic growth through the development of skills. And the way that we can do that is through a national skills development policy that's industry-led, developed by industry for industry, and dictates the sort of skills requirements, career pathway, very much what Jason was talking about earlier, a national framework that we can all work towards to achieve the relevant skills and career opportunities.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, Stuart Williams, I'm going to come to you, Jason. Quite an interesting question, Jason. You spent a lot of your time developing standards and thinking about these issues. Stuart Williams asks, do you feel that most staff learn their capability from people they work with and good mentors, and that it's about on the job, it's about a focus? And just to lead to that, Jason, 2 days ago, our webinar was on security leadership. And I asked the panel what they thought the key skills of security leaders were. And strikingly, they were coming up with soft skills, business sense, relationships with other people, in being able to engage. Given that, this is a rather interesting point. We talk about security training. Maybe security is all about people, really, and about learning in action. Jason.
Yep, look, that's a really interesting point. Even with our lowest level of certification, there's a quarter of the units are on people skills and working with people, managing people. At a leadership level, I think this is really critical. I encourage all of my middle and senior staff to participate in providing lectures at universities, schools, etc., and I do that myself. The mentoring program that we have, not just for security people, but I particularly focus on the security ones, is to give them some genuine hands-on experience. They come in with some really good theoretical knowledge, and some of them are, as I say, master's degree level out of Macquarie University in Sydney, but I give them something where they've got to deep dive and engage with people and see how it's going to operate on the ground. So the issue of competence is about skills and knowledge, and being able to demonstrate that in a working environment. So I don't think you can take the working environment out of it, but I do sort of value a lifelong learning model. One of my more senior people has just finished the psychology of risk. Now you think, what's that got to do with security? But it's got everything to do with security, because it's about decision making. It's about understanding the uncertainty of the environment. In her particular case, security. She got high distinction, never done anything other than her BA 30 years earlier, and she got a high distinction for the postgraduate diploma. So it's
let me go to Simon too. Simon, you're a leader in both a company and an organisation, Simon. This point about leadership skills, I mean, it's a really important one, isn't it? Because if it's true that we've got to lead, that leaders are going to have to lead on competencies and many other issues too, we need to think about our leaders and what skill sets they've got. Where does one look to for making sure or providing the right framework for these people and future people to those positions to have what it takes? Simon.
Well, I don't think you can just. Look, I think that's a really good point. I don't think you can just rely on, hope that people are just going to get through. I think constant training for any level of individual in any organisation is important. Not everybody's born with these six senses and everything else, but I think it starts. I think if we go to the origins and we look at university, I do think we have a culture in the UK where everybody is, set their kids off, not everybody, but most parents have set their kids off to university because that's what you do. And I think they've been a little overzealous with university, kicking it off there. And I think it's produced, it's led to our skills gap, it's led to our skills shortage. And I don't, I'm going to probably say something quite controversial now, and I'd say it in any leadership environment as things progress, as people get older, that if I had two candidates and one had come from the university and one had followed an apprenticeship and they were equal in every possible way, but one had taken one route and one had taken the other, I would take the apprenticeship candidate because they would have had more well-rounded skill sets. They would have had the academia with modern training frameworks, and so that's the one I would take. And I think there is a stat, and I don't have it to hand, but I do know that entrepreneurs are more likely to have come from an apprenticeship environment rather than a university background because of the sheer hands-on and on-the-job training. And I'm a big fan of competencies learned in the workplace. I think that's where most of it really does get learnt. And so, yeah, that's my view on it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm an interesting point. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of our webinar. So thank you so much indeed for all the questions. I'm going to ask each of our panelists just in 20 seconds or so, just to sum up what their key thoughts are on skills and competencies and where we go from here. So Simon, your final thoughts, please. Just 20 seconds if you wouldn't mind, Simon.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's interesting that it's an international problem. I don't generally look outside of Europe when I'm talking about skills and competencies, but obviously it's going to be the same thing. So I think it's very important. I think David mentioned world skills, and that's an environment where the whole of the international stage can come together and learn from one another. So that's what we should be doing.
Thank you very much indeed. Jason Brown, just if you wouldn't mind in 20 seconds, Jason, your final thoughts. Where do we go from here? Okay,
very quickly. I think leveraging off the international capabilities, I noticed we had an ASIS CPP on. I send all my people that can do it through that program because I think we need to globalise, and I think we need to link our institutions together, whether it's the Security Institute, works for companies in the UK, ASIS International and others. I think we can use that as also leverage to support the university and vocational sector.
Thank you very much indeed. And let me go to Olivier, your final statement, please. Just 20 seconds if you wouldn't mind, Olivier.
Yes, skills development and identification is essential to prepare the next generation of security professional, and I think the skills about the question of global security, like cyber security, security or risk management, is very important.
Thank you very much indeed. And it seems only right on this debate that we leave the final comment to you, David, who's perhaps at the centre of this issue in the United Kingdom, at least. David.
Thanks, man. I think you've put together an excellent panel, and I've actually learned a lot. And I think there's a lot of good practice out there, especially internationally, and we can absolutely learn from that, develop our own skill set, and improve what we do in this nation. But without a national agenda or a national approach to skills training, the security industry will continue to falter and fail. it's absolutely vital that that's one of the things that we focus on. There is a strategy for cyber and there's a strategy for defence. Why can we not have a strategy for public safety and security?
Thank you very much indeed. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed to my panel. Once again, a focused discussion, some very insightful views. Me too, I agree with David. I learned some issues there. Thanks to Skills for Security as well for supporting this particular subject. It won't go away. It's right at the heart of how we move forward as a sector, as a profession, in getting recognition. Indeed, that very point, getting recognition, brings me to my final issue. I'd like to just encourage you to make a nomination for the OSPAs. We have open in all those countries: India, the United States, Benelux, Romania, Australia, Kenya, Germany, and the UK. If you are, if I could ask you, could you please make one nomination of one outstanding performer in those countries? It's crucial as we go forward, we find out who the outstanding performers are. Just so you know, on this topic, there is a research project we've been doing that comes out in October. Understanding Influences on Security Career and Tackling Jaundiced Views of Security. It'll be available in October. You can see the website at the bottom, or we'll contact you nearer the time anyway. Just so you know, part of a security research initiative study. Finally, to say we're back again next Tuesday. Every Tuesday and Thursday we're with you, where we're going to be thinking about innovation in security and crime prevention. A topic that people speak about as if it's a given, as if security innovation is obvious what it is, it's obvious, you can see it, and it's unqualified good. We'll be questioning all of that next Tuesday. And next Thursday, we have a special webinar specifically on South Africa and what's going on there. So thank you once again to my panel for their insightful views. Thank you once again, you, the audience, for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Hopefully we'll see you next Tuesday. Until then, wherever you are in the world, stay safe.